Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am Chris Gazdick, and I am a mental health and substance abuse therapist. He is Craig Graves, and he is an unbeatable mind life coach. So we are here with a guest who we are very excited to have. More on that in a minute. Let me see. This is throughtherapist'seyes.com, the website that you can catch all the cool things Neil's doing. You can find Craig on wininyourmind.com. He can help you out anywhere in the world with unbeatable mind life coaching. He's getting good at it. He's still offering, I believe, one free kind of a 2-hour assessment thing. Check that out. He's doing a good job to help you out. This is where we see the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, but being aware is not to deliver your therapy services in any way. This is throughtherapist'seyes.com has BetterHelp, where you can click on the counseling tab, look into counseling for yourself from your very own home. We got a lot to cover these next 2 weeks. Craig Graves, how you doing over there anyway?
I'm doing good, man.
That's good. That's good. So
good.
This is the human emotional experience. We're going to figure this thing out together in a unique and fun way, talking all about policing. I didn't plan this, Craig. I really didn't. But it's a good time to be dealing with this because it's all popped up in our social radar again with the George Floyd case and all the crazy things of 2020 and everything that's going on. I don't know that we'll get into that quite so much because we have a lot more to cover in the other angle that people, I think I would argue, Craig, people don't spend a lot of time thinking about these issues from the perspective of police officers and trauma and the experiences that they go through and the challenges that whole industry, has. It's a crazy thing. Would you say, Craig?
Definitely is.
There's a lot going on there that I just maintain as a mental health professional that is not addressed really nation and world and possibly, in the history of man, as different societies have always had policing, and you can go back as far as you want. And I think that we've never really done a good job of addressing the issues from the inside of a police precinct, policing in general, outward. And that's what we're going to attempt to venture into today. The person that we have, and I must admit and apologize right off the get-go, Chris. I swear I want to say your name, Lawrence. I can't get away from Lawrence. I don't know why.
Well, I've gotten Lawrence all my life, so it's actually Lowrance, but yeah. I will respond appropriately to Lawrence as well.
And I'll respond to anything you got with Gazdick because I get a lot of different things of that too. So this is Mr. Chris Lowrance, and he has been a police sergeant in a local precinct in our area. And thank you very much for the service that you have done. Dude, Craig, for like 3 decades, this guy's been bouncing around. That's a long time in policing. And so we have a lot to say about what's going on with your experience and experiences and, early on, during, and after. And I think you guys out there really want to listen to this and the things that we have to talk about. And I'll just give a little bit of a prequel or a spoiler. He's got a major event going on very, very soon that you're going to be really interested to hear about what he's going to do on his bike. So, Chris, sir, I introduced you not as Sergeant Lowrance or Officer Lowrance, and I did that kind of for a reason. Because I think you're Chris, right?
I am Chris.
Right?
Yes, I retired February 1st after 28 years, a little over 28 years in law. It's a life-changing event. It's something that, you go a lifetime with people and experience situations with them that are quite unique.
Right.
You build a bond with your coworkers. It's a camaraderie that you lose. I did go back as a reserve police officer, and I am working in an area elementary school as a school resource officer part-time.
Still do?
I still do.
All right. That's cool. And here's what we're going to do. Let me put the line up. We've got this new format, Craig, and we're going to try to stick with that. We're debating how this is going. We definitely want your feedback, audience, everybody. Please let us know what you're thinking about this. So we're going to do this in kind of, 6 segments, and we're going to, I don't want to be rushed with the segments. I want to kind of go with our conversation like we normally do. So over the next few days and next week, over the next few days of that week, we'll kind of blend these things together in how that we kind of have the conversation kind of, going. But we want to start with kind of some of your experiences, really, inside the mind of a police officer. I named the show Through a Therapist's Eyes.
Okay.
We should probably name this Through a Police Officer's Eyes.
All right.
For the next couple of weeks, if you think. right? So we want to get your experiences and whatnot, and then we want to get kind of what you're doing with this ride. And then we want to go, where do we go into the mental health implications while you're policing and what happens in that process. And then we want to go into the mental health implications after policing, which is what you just alluded to and the big piece of what you got going on now. And then we want to kind of look a little bit at, what the views are that we have about needs for changes in policing. And so we have a lot to get to. We have a lot to do. And I just, before we even get going, man, I want to really publicly thank you and say, man, it's awesome for you to come on and to be able to talk about something that I just want to really honor right from the get-go, because I know there's this thing they call the blue line, and so we've all heard of this thing, with the blue line and the men and women, that are serving us. And I think that does do a little bit of a disservice, because it does something in mental health that I know to be a terrible idea, which is isolation. And so if we can come together to kind of deal with these issues, crossing the lines and coming together to understand kind of what's going on all sides of the equation, and I think we need to do that. We need to do that in a bad way. So that's what I mean by blowing up the blue line, to defeat a horrible thing in mental health of isolation. Does that make sense?
It does.
What?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's, in law enforcement, I guess the blue line is the line that people don't cross. It's the line between the just and the unjust. Your law enforcement officers are there to maintain that line, to maintain the order of society. It does create a group of individuals that are somewhat isolated, but it's not just law enforcement, it's first responders in general. I mean, you have red lines, you have yellow lines, police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, military. All of those have a line that's associated with their job. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's somewhat of it's an emblem for it. It's something that I'm proud of. I'm proud to have spent my career maintaining the blue line. But yes, I can see where you, from a therapist side, that you would say that does create some isolation for the law enforcement. Yeah,
and it's interesting, Chris. I haven't heard that kind of presentation. I don't think that is what people think of as a line or whatnot. I mean, you think of a line in the sand. You think of boundaries of society is kind of what you're talking about, and I've kind of seen it as a bit of a locking agent to where, like when you experience trauma, as you so aptly put, people don't think of EMS workers or just a truck driver in an ambulance. I mean, these people, we were talking on the phone, you were talking about the 911 operators themselves. I mean, there's all of this trauma that, as we said before the mics came on, we began thinking about it with Vietnam and military. And I told you that I think it's worse in first response systems wide, in the chronicity of it. And maybe we'll get to that. We've talked about that before on our show with chronic and compound trauma. And, there's a belief out there that no one can understand what we go through. So we only talk to, who has done our stuff together.
You talk to people that understand.
Yeah.
And the ones that understand are your coworkers that have been along your side and experienced the same experiences that you have.
Right.
It's a brotherhood and sisterhood.
Absolutely.
I spent 20 years on our SWAT team, and, the things that you experience in that really bonds you together, the threats that you face, the trust that you put in your teammates. It builds a bond between you, and the isolation is, I think, more along the lines of you start hanging out with those that understand what you're experiencing. So maybe your childhood friends, people that you grew up with, that you used to share things with, you don't share those things with them anymore. You share them with your coworkers because they're the ones that you feel understand it.
Yeah, and we've learned that with people that are in foxholes. Mm-hmm. Like I said, we started out with military, and I've had the distinct and privilege and honor to talk to special forces people about this, and one of the things that I think is beautiful that has started to happen, in those circles is, they are coming out and telling their story. I mean, I would love to talk to Marcus Luttrell, who one of the best books I've ever read was his Lone Survivor. I mean, it was just so intense. It was so well done. And he's out, now telling his story, and he's a speaker, and he's giving his story over and over and over again. And people can then take the veil of misunderstanding out about those experiences and on some level understand the trauma, and then the trauma gets we just need to kind of talk about debriefing. The trauma gets decreased every time you tell your story. It isn't even for the person that's hearing the story, whether they understand it or not. It's when you come out. That's why I said, I want to start out before we even get going, to honor what it is that you're doing, because I think it's just an absolutely huge step to do that. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yes. Are you speaking of my bicycle ride? Or are you
I'm
speaking
of just being here.
Of being here.
Just being here right now.
It's a difficult thing to talk about. And mental health in law enforcement is somewhat of a taboo subject. No officer wants to lose their ability to do their job because they are deemed unfit for duty. And
terrifying.
They're terrified. That's the livelihood for them, to support their family, their children. And quite often they cover it up, or they keep it inside.
Right.
Because it's the taboo. It's the fear of losing your job, losing your livelihood, losing the ability to support your family.
Yeah. It's absolutely terrifying, and that's kind of where I see more of the line that in a negative way, to where it prevents help that we know that's out there. So as we get into this all the next few days and this little journey that we're going to go on, I want to keep us all kind of mindful of that, and particularly towards the end of what are some changes that we could do to knock into that so that people can be well how about that, so that people can be well while they're doing first responding type positions.
Right.
That's golden, man. That's what I'm after and passionate about as a mental health professional.
And those things are going to have to start with your agency leaders.
Yeah.
And the awareness that they're going to have, and even implementing some kind of mental health program within the department that is mandated.
Yes, across the board. Every man and woman.
You have to go to a debriefing. Say it happens several times a year, twice a year, 3 times a year. And you have to go in and talk about the things that you've experienced.
You might think I'm crazy. Chris, I believe it should happen after every shift.
Well,
I do.
There's a logistics issue that would probably impact that a little bit.
Sure. And
a financial issue that's also, it's going to be, because you've got to have the time to get the men and women off the road and do the debriefing. But the way that most agencies are set up, whenever one shift's coming off the road, the next shift is starting.
And that's where I think we need to get discussions going and figure that out, because it could be 5 minutes, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. The debrief is a good point. And before we get too far along, maybe Chris, if you wanted to share some more about who you are, if you want to do that. But I'm going to stay on this point for a second. So you brought up special operations earlier, Chris, and I know they do a debrief after every mission where they sit down and talk about what went right, wrong as a group, on that particular mission. Chris, is there anything like that at the end of a shift where the officers just sit down and what happened on the shift, anything that needs to be addressed? Is there any kind of just debrief among the team?
Well, back in the 90s when I started, early 90s, we would have a shift debriefing each day. And you basically went in and you wrote down on it was a printout of each call that you went to, and you had to write down what you did. It really wasn't shared among the officers, but you were in there together and you could talk about things that went on. That was a good thing. But we worked a different shift rotation back then. We worked 10-hour days instead of 12-hour days. So whenever that came about, the shift change went to 12-hour days. That took away the ability to bring the officers into the office and actually have a physical debrief. And then you have so much advancement in technology now with mobile data terminals, MDTs in cars, the computers, the ability to send in your paperwork remotely, reports that you've taken, incidents, wrecks. Everything is isolated the officer from being in the office. It keeps them on the road longer, which is a good thing, but there's negatives to it as well.
That's a societal reality we've had this pandemic. I tell you, everybody's doing that.
So do you think those things were beneficial, or do you think that what's happening now with the tech is sufficient? What just in your opinion, what do you think was better?
I enjoyed the debriefing, but it takes a long time. Here in Gaston County, maybe you work in Cherryville. Well, you drive to Gastonia, which is a pretty good drive to get to Gastonia to do a debriefing. And if you live in Cherryville, then you turn around and drive back to Cherryville to go home.
Oh, good point.
Those aspects of it are great to be able to do things remote. We still have, where I worked, a roll call meeting. And typically it's done once a month. You go in and the shift commander, the captain, comes in and he talks about issues that are going on, maybe problematic areas within the county that they want, more emphasis put on. But it's still not that atmosphere of sharing experiences.
Got it.
I would submit that's a missing thing as we develop. Here's what I want to do. A little warning to the audience. We're going to have very brief intros in this because I can tell we got a lot to say and a lot to cover. Here's what I want to do is get a little bit of the real experiences, like what's it like to be a police officer? And I think I want to just maybe try, and we'll bleed over into the next segment tomorrow, guys. But if you look at your experiences, I know over 30 years, there's got to be like just mountains of daily activity, with things that you've seen and things that you've been a part of, things that you've witnessed, things that you've had to do, things that you've had to say to people, and just all sorts of just scenarios and stuff that people can't understand on a daily basis. I think if you're listening to this show, you should definitely listen to Sean McGinnis when we had him on our show talking about these things. He's well known in our area as well in policing, and he characterized the adrenaline dumps that just happen. You might have 3 or 4 on one shift, right?
Absolutely.
It's over the top in biology. So I'm going to give you an impossible question. How about that?
Hang on a second before we do that, Chris.
Okay.
Before we ask Chris about his experiences, how come you went down? What led you into policing? And just for everybody's knowledge, I went to high school with Chris. I've known Chris for a long time. And so tell us what led you down the path of becoming a police officer, if you don't mind sharing.
The honest path.
Yep.
I went to UNC Charlotte, and I was going to major in computer science. My parents told me they would pay for my college as long as I passed my classes. Well, I didn't pass my computer science class, Pascal. So I learned real quick that I better find something that I could do to make better grades so that my parents would continue helping me with my education. So it was a financial thing for me initially. So I decided to take a criminal justice class, and one of the courses required a ride-along. So I taught with Gaston County Police Department, and I was assigned to ride with Sergeant Tony Robinson. And I did a shift ride along with them. I had to write a paper about it, but after I rode with him that night, I knew that was what I wanted to do.
Awesome.
It's a passion.
It's a passion.
Mm-hmm.
It is the most fulfilling, gratifying job, and it's also the scariest thing you'll ever do in your life.
Wow, that's a big statement. Yeah, it's a big statement.
Anybody ever tells you that they weren't scared, they're lying to you, because there's times that it's a different type of scared. You're scared for yourself, but you're scared for your coworker.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to explain unless you've walked in those shoes.
That's interesting. I've never heard a police officer say that, because you hear that a lot on, I listen to a lot of guys who were ex-military, and they talk about, I don't care about myself, I care about my buddies beside me. And I've never heard a police officer say that.
Sure.
So that's interesting.
Well, one of the most difficult things that I did, I spent 20 years on our emergency response team. We had a subject that was barricaded and had fired shots at us. He had struck our armored vehicle, and we had to go in the house and get him. And you rely on your training, and you rely on your partners on the team. But you ever get that feeling sick on your stomach? Maybe you've got a performance to do, or a wrestling match, or some kind of sparring event, and you're just kind of sick on your stomach. Everybody calls it butterflies.
Yeah.
That is how I felt putting my guys in that situation, because I didn't want the suspect hurt, but I certainly didn't want our guys hurt.
Yeah.
So, but to be responsible for putting people in that position it's a very heavy weight to carry.
Wow. How do you make that call? Who's the first one in? How do you?
Well, it's an assigned positions on the team. You have a point man, and you have breachers, and
Okay.
everybody has
Just like
specific jobs, and they know what they're doing. They know how to carry them out.
Wow.
And when you hit on a situation like that, and it's what we call a dynamic entry, it's full blown, wide open, but it's very choreographed. People knows where the person in front of them is going to go, and you communicate with each other. We used every means that we could to try and bring him outside using chemical munitions, but that didn't work. So in the end of it, to resolve the situation, we had to do the entry onto the residence.
And I'm hoping everybody made it out okay.
Everybody made it home safe.
Good. Suspect too?
Suspect too.
Awesome.
Well, he didn't go home. He went
he made it out.
We gave him somewhere else to stay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So here's what I'm going to do. Here's a teaser. Okay, and we're gonna take a break and hit day 2. So this will be a teaser for you, and Chris, this will give you a couple minutes to think about it. My impossible question is there an example? Maybe that was one that gives you a little bit of a taste of just one little incident. But in all that time, is there a particular incident or event that kind of sticks out in your mind that characterizes policing experiences? Okay, so you think about that. We'll hit that tomorrow, everybody. Look, we have not even started the content that I've got in mind, so you guys are going to definitely want to tune into all this. We've got a dynamic conversation to have with Mr. Chris Lowrance. So we're going to tune in, and we're going to see you tomorrow with more experiences, and we want to hear about this bike ride starting tomorrow. You guys have a good evening, and we're going to talk to you tomorrow.